And there is this story, a true story of an orca whose child died. And this orca carried the orca calf, the dead orca calf, for 17 days, just carried it on its body, which I don't know how you can swim carrying a dead body, but this orca managed to do that. And I think I love that message because it's like, this grief that I'm experiencing matters, and it's okay to have this feeling, and that's something that I'm always trying to share with my patients, with my colleagues, with my friends. If you're having a feeling, how you act on it, you want to make sure that you don't cause harm, but it's okay to have a feeling, and it's okay to be seen, and it's okay to cry, it's okay to be upset. And I try to make people feel safe to have those experiences.
Yeah.
So that's what I tend to think of. And also they are protective, I think. And so they move around in packs, and that's how I feel about community. Making sure that people feel supported, making sure that it's not just your one parent. Like I talked about, you should have a community of parents who are looking out for you as a child. And just as a human being, hopefully you have a chosen family or a biological family, but you should have people who are looking out for you. Who would notice if you were gone and take care of you if you couldn't take care of yourself. So I think that's my brand symbol, and I think that's how I use it every day. I use it mentally. I don't have any image of it, but
yeah. Another thing that was interesting is that the female killer whales can live up to 100 years. But for male, they can live up to 64 years. So just a fun fact there about a killer whale. How did you develop this passion for this personal brand symbol, or when did it register in your mind that I would like to relate to this animal? Tayo, welcome to my show.
thank you. It's great to be here after
Yeah.
all of our time in high school, and now we're here.
Yeah, it's a full circle. We used to sit in the same class, and now we are in a podcast together. So this is a great day.
Yes.
Yeah, so today is special. We are joined by someone who knows how to transform compassion into justice, expertise into purpose, especially in healthcare, leadership, and families. Tayo, before we start, why don't you introduce yourself and tell us who you are?
I'm Tayo Adjapon-Yamoah. I'm a pediatric nurse practitioner, and I've been doing this for 10 years. I guess I'll age myself. I started doing this when I was 25, so I was one of the youngest pediatric nurse practitioners probably in the world at the time, because that's probably the youngest that you can be. And I grew up in Ghana. My family is from Ghana and Nigeria. I went to high school in Ghana with you. We went to SOS, which was a very eye-opening experience. It just taught us a lot about thinking through problems, talking through issues. We had a very humorous high school experience with a lot of kids from everywhere, getting to know how to talk to everyone. And I always feel like that experience shaped me as well. After high school, I went to Tufts University in Massachusetts, and then I went straight to Yale University, which is the only school I applied to, the only school that I had the preparation for in terms of prerequisites. And I got into their pediatric nurse practitioner program. And after that, I moved to the border of Mexico by myself, and I started practicing and just packed my bags and went. And this was a very rural town, 4,000 people, a culture that I wasn't experienced with. It almost felt like it wasn't in the US, but it was a great experience. The rural life wasn't quite for me, so I ended up moving back to the East Coast, and I've lived in New York City since then. But I regularly go back home to Accra, and I try to connect with people from home, and it definitely informs how I practice.
You have quite a diverse background in meeting different cultures. Even from high school, our high school, we had people from all over Africa, all over US, all over Europe, and any, I think there was also Japan and Asia and everyone. It was like a small America in a small small high school. And it looks like that experience extended beyond your academics and also your professional life, where you found yourself in different cities. And I think you said that you went to rural New Mexico,
Rural Arizona, but also very
rural
close to
Arizona.
Mexico.
Yeah, rural Arizona. And then even through your experience through Yale, you ended up being in the board of directors for the nursing school there, right?
Yes, and that was very important to me because when I was in nursing school, I was one of three Black students. And if you went through this hallway where we had the pictures of each graduating class for decades, it was no Black students, no Black students, no Black students. We used to sit there and just look at them. And then finally, maybe 10 years before I had come, there would be one, or one, and then maybe two, and then our year was three. So we felt very underrepresented, and I
Yeah.
wanted to make sure that I had the chance to influence some decisions, make sure that Black alumni felt represented and like that was a safe space for them and current students as well. And there is a wonderful board, and things have changed very much at that school, but I'm very grateful to be part of it.
Yeah, actually, I wanted to ask you, like, based on your experience, you've been to Ghana, you've been to Nigeria, Arizona, and now you are in Brooklyn, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so how has this shaped the way you lead and connect with people, especially in your role as a board of directors? And I know you mentioned a bit that how you influence that, but can you touch on how your experience in all these different cultures and geographic position has shaped the way you interact and how you make decisions, especially being on the board?
So being on the board, I think it constantly reminds me to think about other people with other life experiences. So when we are having, for instance, let's say we're giving a talk about mental health and
Hmm.
we're doing it as part of an alumni event, someone might say something like mental health in third world countries, and they mean that comment innocently. And that's what they want the title to be. And that's how people talk, and that's okay. And that's it's not meant to be harmful. And yet we always have to refocus because we have students who are from all over the world. And so although it might seem like the third world is far away. And I don't mean to use that expression, but just, how people talk about it. But it
Yeah,
might seem far away, but some of the best doctors, nurses, and, students to become those are from all over, including under-resourced places that people would refer to as third world. So how does it
yeah,
feel when you sit in a talk and this is innocently the title, and the person who might have come up with this is, thinking about this innocently, but
yeah.
it's harmful. It makes people feel alienated. And this is just one example. And I don't think anybody actually wanted to use that term, but I think it was maybe
Hmm.
Africa, which is almost synonymous in that way, in that tone. But
Yeah,
Africa is a continent with 54 countries. So we need to be very careful when we use that term because in healthcare, people love to say Africa as an example of, where terrible things happen in healthcare and everyone is dying. And
yeah,
while it certainly, could be true to some extent, I'm not saying that the continent is perfect. It's not helpful if you are a student from an African country to sit at Yale and
yeah,
hear people use certain language, that makes you feel like you don't belong there.
yeah. Tayo, do you remember our school motto from Ghana?
Yes, knowledge in the service of Africa.
Yeah, so I think you are extending that even in your board, in your as board of director, and what you just covered is there's that knowledge that you are spreading to people. You are in a room where you say that it used to be like the people on the board used to be like white, 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 white. And then all of a sudden, when you are there for the 10 years, you start seeing the cycle of there is more like representation of people that look like you. and probably that inspired you to get there too and even make more changes there. So I think that's powerful in what you're doing to keep changing the narrative. The only time we refer to first world country is when there's a problem that typically is known to be in a third world country, for example, and now the first world countries are facing it. So it always feels sometimes good to say that's a first world problem. It's like,
Yes.
so is people expect it to happen over there, but it's happening over here, and you are in a position where you can create that change. So in your eyes, what does it mean to bring humanity to every interaction, especially in today's healthcare landscape?
So I was thinking about this yesterday because it definitely comes up in work. I meet several people a day for the past 10 years. So I'm very used to meeting people. And to be honest, it's difficult because like at my current job, I get either 10 minutes or 20 minutes for most of my appointments. And people tend to not realize, how short a time we get. And so they might come 10 minutes late. And so you might be backed up and you might be stressed. And so there's always a tendency to think that this person is just an appointment that I have to get through, and I'm tired. And sometimes you might be sick and anything might be going on. You could be grieving. We don't think about our doctors as people sometimes or our nurses as people. But sometimes your nurse or your doctor comes into your appointment and they just got off the phone and they found out that their family member is dead. But they won't just leave, they have to stay. And so that interaction is now charged because you might feel like I'm going to rush out of here. I don't feel present. And you might also be able to tap in and think, okay, this person really needs me and they're here for help. And it's not just an appointment to them. They have concerns and they need to be heard. And it really
Yeah.
does work both ways because I think there's a tendency in all of us to think of people as tools or characters in our personal video game. So this person who is at the store is purely exists just to help me. They don't
Yeah.
exist as a person outside of that. Or this
Hmm.
doctor just exists to dismiss me. They don't have a life or a family. And if you think about it, most people have someone who's ill in their life. And so most people have the ability to tap into that compassion. But you might assume that, your healthcare providers don't care about you. Or you might assume that your patient is just annoying. And so there's a lot of opportunity for those interactions to just feel empty and to be devoid of true connection. But at the same time, I remember once I gave a career talk at a high school. Someone asked me, how do you avoid getting too emotionally attached or involved with your patients? And I said, I don't think I try to avoid that because I think in my role as a pediatric nurse practitioner, I need to have an emotional connection. And so I've never really tried to avoid that, and I still don't try to avoid it. So when I think of my patients and when I'm sitting with my patients, I do strive to think of them as family members or as friends, not in an inappropriate way, but just remembering that this person matters. And what would I do? I ask myself this almost every half hour. What would I do if this person were part of my family? How would I want to handle this? What would I
Yeah.
be worried about? Um, and I try to treat people that way. And the wonderful thing about outpatient care versus the emergency room where you never see anybody again, I do
Hmm.
get to see people grow up. And so I get to see someone come in, they just became a parent 2 days ago, and this child was just born. And I
Hmm.
mean, the awe of that doesn't really go away because it's amazing. The first time I saw a baby get born during a clinical rotation, I was on cloud nine because how did you not exist and now you exist? And I
Yeah.
still feel that way because you grow up, you come back, you're 3 months old, now you're
Yeah.
smiling, you're
Yeah.
rolling, you look different, you're starting to
Yeah.
look like you. And I see sometimes if it's your biological child, I see that they look like the parents.
Yeah.
Um, and it's amazing to feel like you are part of that family. And I
Yeah.
hope that my patients know that I do deeply care about them and I go home and I think about what's going on with them. And it's not always the case. I mean, we do have interactions with patients who are very angry with us and assume that we are
Mhm.
just there
Yeah.
to, I don't know, just cater to them and we don't have any. feelings of our own, and we're okay with being spoken to rudely and things like that. But I do
Hmm.
try when possible to recover those issues. And I have had moments where someone says, you know what, I'm really sorry. I just came from a funeral, and that blows my mind because here I am thinking this person is just being rude. This person is being very difficult, but actually this person is grieving, and this person doesn't feel that it's okay to burst into tears in my office. And so they're being angry instead as a defense mechanism. And I've had
Yeah.
people almost every week, somebody comes in and they're asking questions about breastfeeding or formula feeding, and then they're crying, and it's just because it's such a stressful thing to feel like, am I doing a good job feeding my baby? And
Yeah.
the question behind that is, am I a bad parent? And I
Yeah.
think that that's behind a lot of the interactions that we have, right? The doctor is thinking, am I a bad doctor? And the patient is thinking, am I a bad parent? And so we trying to get to the meat of those interactions is what I try to do,
Yeah.
because I don't want to feel like we're just following a script and you leave the appointment and you don't actually feel like you were heard.
Yeah. I agree. You mentioned one thing that hopefully your patients or people, parents will see this, and anybody who goes for healthcare visits will see this. They need to understand that everyone we see, whether they are smiling or crying or just sitting there happy or sad, everyone is fighting a different battle. And what you mentioned one thing that made me think that now I'm going to be on time to my hospital visits now, because you mentioned you guys have 10 minutes, and if somebody gets late, your entire day is back now. You have to find a way to speed up the next visit, and that might also impact that kind of service to the next person. So I think that's powerful. One thing I picked up is I saw how you were happy when you say that when you see a newborn and then after 3 months. I think something that is fulfilling that people in your profession see is every day as parents, we bring our kids and you measure the size of their head, the the height of the kids and how they are growing. And I can see the chart. And when I'm talking to my kids' doctor also, I can see how happy they are when they are presenting this information. So at least after meeting these people, that looking at that performance and you can see a human being growing over time, that is fulfilling to me. And I think you mentioned another thing about parents. Why do you think parents are the most influential leaders?
Because for the beginning of a child's life, or really, as long as they are a child, you are providing the world in which that child lives. Most of their time is spent at home. And I don't think everyone always understands how much power you really have, because toddlers, for instance, seem to rule the home or try to rule the home. And, you can almost feel like you're drowning in the behaviors and all of that.
That's
But
very true. Yeah.
you, at the end of the day, the parent is in charge, and
Yeah.
you are creating the world for this child. And it's funny because I will mention the third world country thing again. It's probably one of my biggest pet peeves. But
Yeah.
we often call African countries third world countries, and
Yeah.
people have said African countries are uncivilized. But that is purely from an economic perspective. When we look at parenting, successful parenting, successful
It's in
children,
Africa. Yeah.
it's in Africa. And so it really is like something that should be studied, like the methods
Yeah.
of Nigerian parenting, Ghanaian parenting, that's courageous and really boundaried parenting. And yes, some of it is just physical abuse and there's strictness that goes too far, but there's
Mm-hmm.
also just very courageous boundary setting and creating that world, and that makes children feel safe, having those boundaries, having those rules. Imagine if you went around and you were driving and there were no traffic rules at all. Nobody would feel safe. Having
Yeah.
some structure makes people feel safe, including
Yeah.
teenagers, including younger children. Teenagers are seen as sullen or difficult. And I will say, having met thousands of teenagers, I really have to disagree. I find them to be some of the most respectful, interesting, introspective people because they're going through this period of self-discovery. And so they're so open. Their mind is like a sponge. anything you say, they listen. They may not do what you
Hmm.
say. They may not
Yeah.
seem to listen, but if you speak to them with respect and you ask
Hmm.
them questions and you create that connection and they're saying, okay, she's listening to me. She wants to hear about me. They do listen. And so you are creating young people, who believe things that are, potentially world changing through your
Yeah.
home environment. And not
Yeah.
just your own home environments, because another thing about African culture is we have a community style of parenting. So aunties and uncles, grandparents, those are also parents. When I was growing up, I had an auntie who didn't have children, and it never occurred to me that she wasn't in some way my parent. She took care of me just like all my other aunties did. My aunties were able to discipline me, my uncles were able to discipline me, and my aunties and uncles show up for me still today. And I try
Hmm.
to show up for my own nieces and nephews.
Yeah.
But it's not just parenting. And I think that that's a Western concept where your parents are the only people who create your world when it's supposed to be a community. And that responsibility is supposed to be shared. You're not supposed to be by yourself, I guess, unless you want to. But I don't think you should be by yourself with a newborn doing everything. You're supposed to have help.
Yeah. I agree. So yeah. So basically, you are saying that parents are the ones shaping the next generation today, and with that understanding, what would you say to those trying to lead with compassion in this world today?
I think I spoke about this with you earlier, but just thinking about people as individuals always,
Yes.
that stereotypes are helpful and they're informational, but when you think of people as a monolith and that this group is just this way, you're always going to end up harming. And so I
Hmm.
think thinking about people as individuals and coming to them with curiosity. So always wanting to learn and not making assumptions about people, even in jobs. Like if
Yeah.
you are an employer or a manager, your employees are not a monolith. They are all different people. And so if you're not connecting with them on an individual level, that's even going to have financial consequences for you.
Hmm. Yeah.
Because if people don't feel cared about, at the end of the day, it's the most important thing. Even in businesses,
Hmm.
people need to feel cared about. And those
Yeah.
granular interactions can make or break your entire company. So even just from a practical perspective, it's so important to see people as individuals and connect with them that way.
Yeah. So basically, you're saying there is danger in viewing people as monoliths, right? Can
Mhm.
you share a moment on how you learned about the importance of this belief?
Yes. So for one example was when I was in Arizona, I had just started practicing and I was spending one day a week on a bus clinic. So we had a bus that had been outfitted and we would
Hmm.
park it outside of the local high school. And so we would see the teenagers for their secret appointments that their parents didn't need to know about. So they
Yeah.
would come in between their classes, they would come for an appointment. And it was very hot sometimes because it was, the deserts and the bus was made of metal and all of that. So I remember sitting in this hot, stuffy, tiny little clinic, and this girl had come in and her periods were late. And we did a pregnancy test, and it turned out
Mm.
that she was pregnant. And I know we don't conventionally think of pregnant people as people that we think of as monoliths, but I think we
Hmm.
do because most people would say they're pro-life or they're pro-choice, and they have beliefs about this is how you should handle a pregnancy and this is how you shouldn't. I have had to
Yeah.
tell dozens of people that they are pregnant, and each one of them has been different.
Yeah.
Each one of them has wanted to do something different or has felt differently about their pregnancy. And I remember thinking, because I do care a lot about life, and I think ending a life is significant and
Hmm.
something to grieve. And
Hmm.
so I don't want to seem to be callous about even the life of a clump of cells, that is a potential for life. I do care about that. At the
Hmm.
same time, when I sat there in that dusty, stuffy room and I was talking to this teenager,
Yeah.
I remember thinking, oh my God, I can't believe that people are debating what people should do
With their
with
bodies.
women's bodies.
Yeah.
Because just telling her, and she's just a kid, I think she was, I don't know, 15, telling her you're pregnant, all I wanted to do was just make sure that she had every choice available to her.
Yeah.
And it didn't matter how I'd grown up, very religious, and how much I care about life in general. My
Mm-hmm.
one concern was, what does she want to do? And I
Yes.
think from that day, I've always approached that conversation that way. And to be honest,
Mm-hmm.
I do think that that's rare. From what I hear from other teenagers, they try to get appointments and people shut them down. They tell them that they're murdering their child.
Mm-hmm.
Or unfortunately, I had a patient who was 15 who wanted to keep her pregnancy, and her family forced her to
Mm-hmm.
terminate this pregnancy, and that's not what
Yeah.
she wanted to do. And I
Mm-hmm.
think each one of these interactions, you just have to have a choice. You have to ask this person, even if they're a teenager and you think they're just a kid, what do you want to do?
Yeah. Yeah, so you have a lot of experience in this, and I know even in the examples that you're giving, that Planned Parenthood stuff is actually shaping the political scene also. Whether once you pick one side, yeah, you know which side you are. Like people can actually tell which side people are. So all these experiences that you have, I know you have a strong personal brand, and I want to ask you, how do you define your personal brand? And what problem does it solve exactly?
So I will preface this by saying that I hadn't thought about this much before you asked me. And so I really appreciate you for asking people this question and engaging in this way. I've
Thank
watched
you.
some of your other interactions and I thought, this is really cool that you're doing this. So yeah, I had not
Thanks.
thought much about this because in the healthcare space, we don't have as much corporate exposure. And so certain language, we don't really use and don't always think about. Um, so I think my personal brand would be courageous compassion. And I want to include the courageous because compassion is great, but you do have to push back sometimes. You do have
Mm-hmm.
to be practical, and sometimes you have to gently tell people about themselves. And that is how you get to a higher level of understanding in an interaction. And I do think that that's how policy should be shaped, and that's how like healthcare should be shaped. We should be keeping this in the back of our minds. And I think the problem that it solves is, yeah, I guess the potential for empty interactions.
Is so like you say like empty interaction?
hmm Maybe just, yeah, maybe apathy is the problem that it solves because I do think that it's a problem that we're facing in healthcare and otherwise, where you
Mm-hmm.
come into interactions without really engaging truly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so basically it solves the problem for when people don't have sympathy. You want people to sympathize with people that they meet, right?
Yes, but also just approaching the interaction with a general sense of compassion because it's not always I don't think anyone doesn't want to sympathize. I think everybody wants to sympathize with other people. I think most people want to be a good person. But if you don't access those things in yourself, if you're not accessing how you are feeling or
Mm-hmm.
how someone is making you feel and what that means, you will sort of shut down
Yeah.
and just go
So
about your day because it is
yeah.
easier and it's less stressful, or it seems to be, to just kind of ignore
Mm-hmm.
the potential for an interaction that's really meaningful and just kind of sweep it to the side.
Especially in healthcare. I think I mentioned this actually before I said anything. You mentioned a bus. I interviewed Trey Humphreys also yesterday, and he converted a school bus into a party bus. So every time you are saying you had converted an older bus into a healthcare center, I thought of a school bus. Was it a school bus?
I have no idea what it was
Or just a
originally.
big bus? Yeah.
It
So
was the size of a school bus
the
or
size
a
of a school
trailer
bus,
or
and
an RV. I think it was more like an RV that had been
mhm,
changed because we did have a bathroom and it was quite nice. It just
yeah,
would get so hot because it's made of metal and we
there's
are in
no
Arizona.
AC. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So you're working in a tough environment. You are in this bus and you're meeting random people showing up with different problems. And some of these problems, they're showing up to you. It's not something that sometimes people discuss in public, and they're trusting you with that. And the reason for your personal brand, as soon as they understand your personal brand is courageous compassion or compassion, like you mentioned, there's a level of trust that they build towards you, and they're able to tell you all these things, and they're able to listen to what you say. There's a study, Brand Builders Group did a study, and they asked people if they're most likely to visit a doctor with a personal brand or without a personal brand. And I'm trying to remember the number. I think 74%, upwards of 74%, said that they are most likely to visit with a doctor that has a strong personal brand. So healthcare professions might be just be treating people, but if they're not actively building their personal brand, their patient won't know about them. Nothing will attract them to them, and so it it might be difficult to connect with these people. So the problem that you solve, which I think you mentioned earlier, disconnection, aligns well with your compassion.
That's a really good point because we often sometimes we're even just so tired. We don't deal with the marketing part of it and the personal brand part of it. And that is true because if people don't
Yeah.
know anything about you and they just come in and they just think, this person is young or this person is this, and they're not going to listen to me because it is the assumption that a lot of people come in with the assumption they don't want to listen to me. So it's yeah, it makes sense that people want to
Yeah.
check out their doctor and understand what's happening in their brains before they book.
Yeah, I agree. Even as when we're looking for, actually, yeah, when we're looking for our kids' doctors, like we looked at all the profiles and we were reading what it was saying, and we decide based on what they are projecting, or based on what they are saying, or based on what others are saying about them. So yeah, based on your personal brand, how do you balance clinical expertise with cultural sensitivity?
So it's interesting because what I experienced at my current job prior, most of my patients were people of color, whether Hispanic, people of color, or yeah, mostly Hispanic or some Black patients as well who are also Hispanic. Recently, I see Nigerians, Ghanaians, Caribbeans, and these groups feel very familiar to me. So it's so nice to be able to just sit down, connect. I know exactly what you're talking about. If you talk about this oil you're using, I know what you mean.
Yeah.
Um, if you talk about how things are back home, where you're headed, I know where the type of
Mm-hmm.
place that you're going to. So
Yeah.
it's such a joy to share that. And I think we might want to pretend that those things don't matter, but cultural similarity does factor in. And so I do have a lot of patients as well that I'm not culturally as familiar with. And
Mm-hmm.
so you would you when they talk about cultural competency in school, at least in the US, they are teaching you how to talk to Black people, how to talk to Hispanic people. They assume that the school is made up of white students. And so you get this information, but I already had this information and I already had this comfort. What I didn't know was how do you talk to white Americans? Because this was a
Mm-hmm.
group that I just wasn't that familiar with. Even despite school and all of that, most of my friends had still been from similar backgrounds to mine. And I don't even say that as a joke. I truly did want to connect and I felt disconnected because I didn't understand the culture. And I think people would say that white Americans don't have a culture, but they do. It's not an absence of spicy food and things like that. Like there is a culture, and so there's a culture of asking a lot of questions. And so this is something that I had to understand. The culture of asking a lot of questions, but not necessarily needing the answer to those questions, but just asking sort of as a cultural habit and as a
Yeah.
way to feel comfortable and as a way to feel like there's some agency over the situation. And so I've tried to develop a skill of listening to what's being asked behind the question because I'm used
Yeah.
to interactions that are more straightforward. Just say it exactly like it is. I'm not easily offended. I don't mind direct communication. but I've had to learn to ask, what do you really mean by this question? Like, do you feel that your concern has been addressed? Because there is also like, a politeness and a desire to please and
Yeah.
and a desire to, not to seem like a burden. I've had people say, I'm so sorry I brought my child for this small thing. And just to remind them that that's okay. We're here to help you and all of that. Um, so yeah, I would say that the other cultural sensitivity things that most people would think about actually come easily to me, but sort of the reverse has been harder for me. But just
Yeah.
in general, I try to bring those in, I try to let people know that I see where they're coming from when they're
Yeah.
talking about their
Yeah.
culture. So if you're
Mm-hmm.
someone from a culture where people don't usually come over after a baby is born, I've been asked, is it okay for people to come over? And then I try to ask and figure out what their family background is, what's normal to them. People ask
Yeah.
about bathing, and
Mm-hmm.
bathing a baby is very cultural. And I always say this. So you kind of need to ask your family what you should be doing because, in my culture, you bathe the baby every day, but that's not as normal in certain climates. And so I don't want to be telling you something that
Yeah.
doesn't feel like it makes sense to you or your family. And then also there are things that aren't cultural in like a monolithic way, but just things that people are experiencing that are different that you
Yeah.
have to be able to connect with. And you have to be able to say, okay, throw the textbook away. What's really going on? So, like, if a parent is saying, I'm afraid I'm going to hurt my child, you have to figure out, are they really going to hurt their child? What did it take for them to tell you this? And how can
Yeah.
you make sure that everybody is safe, but also not
Mm-hmm.
scare the parents and be like, oh, you know, have this crazy judgmental reaction that makes someone feel unsafe.
Yeah.
Because there's so many reasons why you can feel this way, and you really have to get to know this person culturally and figure out what's going on. I've had a parent say that they didn't love their child and they're
Mm.
struggling with it. The child is 11 years old. They haven't been able to summon love for that child.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
that's not a normal thing in any culture. And yet,
Yeah.
in this particular parent situation and how this child was conceived, it does make sense.
Mm-hmm.
And in Rwanda, after the Rwandan genocide, there were lots of children born who were unwanted. And
Yeah.
I've watched interviews of these parents. Some of these parents still don't love these children. And, they take care of them. They have a duty toward them. They
Mm-hmm.
parent them, but that and love are two different things. And so to be able to
Yeah.
talk to this parent and be like, what you're feeling is not abnormal considering your context. And it
Mm-hmm.
has been studied across the world. This happens sometimes,
Yeah.
and so we're just going to figure out how you and your child can process this and have the healthiest relationship that you can. But also, you can't force someone to feel something that they can't feel when they've gone through a very harrowing experience and they've had the courage to raise and keep this child who reminds them of a painful time.
I think about the Rwanda thing, you're probably implying during the genocide,
Mhm.
there was some activities happening that people end up being pregnant and then they have kids that they don't belong to them, basically, and they don't know who the father is, right?
Yes.
So I think that's what you mentioned as you talk about meeting the different cultural people from different background, like the white family or the people from black ethnic groups. And you mentioned how you are to adapt to start taking care of also to understanding the white culture, and that I think through your personal brand compassion you are able to overcome those easily. So there's some levels of vulnerability, and I wanted to know what role does vulnerability play in both leadership and caregiving in your life? I think since you're in the healthcare profession, there should be something there.
Yeah. I mean, you have to be vulnerable, and
Yeah,
the nice thing is that the person is also being vulnerable with you because they're coming to you with all of their personal issues and all of that. And you have
yeah.
to maintain professional boundaries because this is your job. And you have to maintain your time boundaries. You have to maintain what you're going to do. You have to make sure that you take care of yourself. But also, people don't necessarily believe. what you say unless you prove that you know what you're talking about. So whether you
Mm-hmm.
use examples from people that you know,
Mm-hmm.
or when appropriate examples of yourself, it is important to let people know that you know where they're coming from. Because, and I
Mm-hmm.
know as a patient myself, I
Mm-hmm.
feel so much safer if my doctor is able to somehow relate to me. Like if my dentist says, I'm scared of needles too, don't worry, I'm going to take good care of you. And I tell the children all the time before I vaccinate them, I am very afraid of needles, and
Yeah.
I do remember what it was like to be a terrified child being held down and getting a shot. And so I think that kind of thing is important. You do have to let them know that you're a human too.
Yeah. So you mentioned integrity and common sense are part of your core values. How do you hold on to this in a system that doesn't really reward them?
Well, I'm not, as so long as I get my paycheck, I don't need to be given a thumbs up every time I do anything.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I my integrity is between me and the patients, and oftentimes my administration isn't really getting involved. So I don't think my bosses even know that, before any blood work goes out, I have to check it. I have to label it myself, and I triple check everything because to me, I have a duty to make sure that these things are done accurately and not sloppily. When it comes to
Yeah.
my billing and my coding, I think they do know this because if I truly feel that, this needs to be billed or coded in a certain way, and, it's the level that I'm being asked to bill is maybe not appropriate, and I was the one who was there and I assessed the
Mm-hmm.
patients and all of that. I will say, I didn't do that much work for this interaction. So even though, you want to make sure that you get paid for what you do, your practice that you work for gets paid for what they do. You want to make sure that you bill correctly and you're not under billing. You also don't want to take advantage of anyone. And I just really feel that these things are almost karmic. Like if you try to steal from people in any way, whether through poor documentation or just trying to get an extra bill in,
Yeah.
that's just not going to ever work in your favor in the universe. You have to make sure that you are honorable in that way. And then I
Yeah.
think just being honest too about, if you make a mistake, which hopefully doesn't happen much, but I think if you make a mistake, you need to tell the patient this happened.
Yeah.
Um, and then, go from there. And yeah, you need to offer different options and make sure that you protect your patients when it comes to like teenagers, for example.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't care what a parent says to me. If they're trying to scare me into giving their teenagers confidential results, I won't do it. And
Yeah.
I will stand my ground because my duty is to my patients. And
Yeah.
if they do have protected information in New York, confidential healthcare is taken very seriously. So for the teenagers, their chlamydia, gonorrhea results, pregnancy results, I cannot tell the parent. And I've
Mm-hmm.
seen people break that. And I think you do have to stand your ground.
Yeah.
And then in terms of common sense, yeah, it's not really rewarded, but I think it's a reward in itself because you have to protect yourself in healthcare. So common sense says if all your patients are always coming late and you always accept them, they will continue to come late. Now, that doesn't mean that the person coming late is a bad person or should be punished. If I can squeeze someone in, I do it, no problem, because I don't know why you were late, and that's not my business to try to judge you for that. But if you're coming 20 minutes late and it's just a matter of convenience and you can come back 2 hours later in a slot that I have, and this does not mean now that
Yeah.
my entire staff misses their lunch, then I'm going to make you come back because common sense
Yeah.
dictates that these three people working hard need to eat. They're human beings.
Yeah.
And for the convenience of you coming late and you don't feel like coming back, I'm sorry, but I'm going to choose my staff and their
Yeah.
well-being because if they quit because I don't care about them and I'm not letting them eat, I mean, that's insane. I need them to be okay. And
Mm-hmm.
so we have to strike a balance that way. We have to do what makes sense
Yeah.
and not
You
just
know,
what feels good. Yeah.
yeah, I agree. Based on your response on the system question here, Last 2 weeks ago, I interviewed a surgeon, and he's trying to empower doctors and medical professions to not rely too much on the system. And because, like, basically, he's trying to make them feel like it's not only about the financial reward that the system gives them, but doctors can also accumulate other types of financial rewards apart from their profession. And the reason he's doing that is he doesn't want doctors or medical professions to worry about paycheck. So he wants them to focus on giving service to their patients, but also knowing that even though when they're doing this, they're also accumulating wealth in a different way. So that was his take on the system. So I want to ask you, do you feel shielded or protected in the system that you're in? Not exactly like where you work, but healthcare system in general.
Absolutely not. And I don't think any, if any healthcare professional would say that they are protected and shielded, I mean, that's great, but they're just one event away from that not being the case. It is actually a very exploitative career. And we have executives being paid millions, and then we have extremely hardworking nurses, patient care assistants, just, being abused. A
Yeah.
few weeks ago, this nurse was beaten to a pulp by a psychiatric patient in Florida, I believe.
Mm,
And they released the phone call, and it doesn't sound like the administrators cared at all about how she was doing.
mm-hmm,
And, there is a disconnect because the people at the top don't see patients themselves in general, and
mm-hmm.
they work in KPIs and revenue and all of that. And
Metrics. Yeah.
when you trickle down, these are people. And so all you care about is how many patients did you see. You don't care
Mm-hmm,
how long they took or what's going on. You don't really care if your employees are happy or not, because
mm-hmm.
if they quit, you'll get someone else. And that is kind of how it is in healthcare, not just in the US, I would say all over the world. Most healthcare professionals that I've spoken to feel like they're burning out or feel like they're exploited. And I mean, it's one of the reasons I'm so passionate about boundary setting and avoiding burnouts and making sure that you are taking care of yourself, because
Yeah.
not just financially. And I know you guys had a great conversation about the financial aspect, and I'm going to listen to it in full because I'm trying to take notes. He's really saying things that need to be said and I need to learn. But
Yeah.
not just financially, but just as a person, you have to invest in yourself, your interests outside of medicine, who you are outside of medicine, outside of nursing, and your time boundaries, making sure that you set the tone for how you're going to be treated.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's true. It's interesting to hear that there is no protection, not only even from the human beings at the top, but even from the different types of exposures that you guys go through. And normal people like us, sometimes we don't understand. We just come to you with our problems. I've told you before how I think for babies, it's almost difficult to know how to treat them. Or uh, my kids will be sick and I take them to a doctor and they just check everything and then we go back home. There's no
Mhm,
medicine you can give
mhm,
at a particular age. So
mhm,
that's it. That's my only pet peeve about your profession. So, but I understand that there's a medical reason why babies can't have some type
mhm.
of treatment. So it's still a gray area in how to manage kid sickness. I'm saying this in a teasing way. I think I've told you before offline. Those who are in your profession, parents expect more from them.
Mhm.
And I think like in terms of you guys being protected, in my view, I always want my kid to be healthy. And all you
Yes.
guys are telling me is just let them sleep, check the temperature, and then you still do nothing.
Yeah,
Even
we do
even no
nothing.
medicine. Can you comment on that?
No, I love that you asked this. And sometimes I tell patients directly because, to be honest, It's so terrible. But to be honest, sometimes when we are waiting for like the strep test results, we are hoping that it's positive, and we have to stop ourselves because you don't want somebody to have strep. Strep can have
Yeah.
complications. It can often feel sicker than a regular cold. But we want it to be positive because we're so scared of going back into the room to say, I can't give you anything, you know?
Yeah.
And I know people who prescribe medication for everything, but you shouldn't. And I
Yeah.
think it's just so hard to have that conversation because people
Hmm.
will come to me and they saw my colleague and they'll say that they said there's nothing wrong with them. And I'll say, no, they have a virus. There's not nothing wrong. So I do try to sympathize because having a cold can feel horrible. You know, you are still sick. Just because you don't
Yeah.
need medicine doesn't mean you're not sick, but your immune
Hmm.
system has to take care of it. And so what is the medication going to do? You know, there's nothing that exists to make your cold go away. Your immune
Hmm.
system is going to take care of it, and then it's going to be strengthened. And then we discuss the things to watch for, like if it's turning into an ear infection, if it's turning into pneumonia, if your child is developing breathing distress because they're just too young and the
Hmm.
infection is overpowering them. But
Hmm.
when you come to the office, we are checking, are they breathing okay? Are their
Hmm.
ears okay? You know, we're looking for those things that if you hadn't come, we wouldn't know to say everything is fine. So I always try to tell people the visit is not a waste of time because
Yeah.
now we're saying it's okay to just be home. Otherwise, I know I would just be so anxious.
Yeah.
Is it okay for this child to be sleeping here at home? Do
Yeah.
they need to be in the hospital? But actually,
Yeah.
when you get that confirmation that, okay, this is a home thing, then you can rest easy. And I also try to remind myself, you know, in the past year, I've lost a few family members, and my close friend has had cancer,
Mm.
which
Sorry to hear.
she's
Yeah.
recovered from. Thank you. Um, I've had some illnesses in my personal life as well, and I try to remind myself, you know, we are not owed health. We
Hmm.
think we are because we live in a developed country and we think that everything should be solvable. You know, if you want food, you can Uber Eats it. If you want this, you can order it on Amazon. And so we think problems should just be able to be solved. But sometimes we have to remember that not every problem is solved easily or quickly. And that
Hmm.
doesn't mean that anybody has done anything wrong. We've had patients die in our practice where you look at everything that happened and it wasn't anybody's fault. But sometimes you want to be able to blame someone, you know, for why this terrible thing happened. And even
Yeah.
when my friend got sick, even when I got, it's like you just want to be able to say it was this person's fault because that's a way to process it. But I do
Hmm.
try to remind myself things just happen and you do your
Yeah.
best, but we are not owed health. And so,
Hmm.
especially with what has happened and many sick kids that we've seen who don't get better, even with
Hmm.
medication,
Yeah.
you know, I try to remember that we're so lucky, you know, if something is a cold. And
Yeah.
it's hard because it's not, you know, there's capitalism involved as well. Sometimes the parent isn't worried. They just want to be able to go back to work because if
Yeah.
they lose their job, how are they going to put food on the table for this child? That's not a frivolous concern. That's important. How do you,
Hmm.
you know, or if you can't make this older child better and you have a newborn,
Yeah.
what's going to happen to the newborn? So you need
Hmm.
this problem to be solved, and yet there's no solution. And
Yeah.
so at the end of the day, like it's very frustrating and that's very valid. I also try to
Yeah.
reframe, you know, and remind, I don't actually ever say this, but you know, we should think that we are very
Yeah.
fortunate to have these mild illnesses, to have an
Yeah.
immune system that works, you know,
Yeah.
and be able to recover. But of course, I would never say this because at the moment, you know, you're sleep deprived, this child is sick, they're not feeling
Yeah.
well. That's all that matters. You know, perspective is not always helpful. Telling people it could be
Hmm.
worse is never ever helpful. But
Yeah.
just as an individual, I do try to think that way and remember, you know, that we are
Hmm.
very lucky. We're all lucky in some way. I'm
Yeah.
sure there's someone on earth that cannot be said for, but I think most of the people I know have some kind of blessing in their lives. And
Yeah. Yeah.
it's cheesy and it's cliche, but it is
I
important
agree.
to focus on that.
Yeah. One night I was driving around, my kid was sick, and we went to emergency room. We sat in the waiting room for a while, and then they told us we go. They checked for. We were waiting for the results, but we thought we will get it that same night. so that we can get the right medication. Because like remember you said you hope that it's a positive so that you can prescribe
Yes,
the right medicine.
yes,
But if it's not, then the parents goes home like confused. So
yes,
for me too, I was in the emergency room. We went. Then they said the results will come tomorrow, and I'm there at 2 a.m. And then but they prescribed something still. So I drove a few miles down to CVS, and we were still in the CVS at 3 a.m. So it's always annoying when we don't know. So I can tell how you guys want us to be comfortable and know that we are taken care of, but also we want to answers.
yeah. And I think a lot of the healthcare professionals don't think about that because I've seen ridiculous delays in getting people their results.
Yeah.
And it's not good because you have to remember this person is waiting by the phone terrified. And
Hmm.
so you want to get those results to people right away. Like most blood work, I do tell people if it's going to take longer, but most blood work comes back in about a day. So
Yeah.
then
24 hours. Yeah.
yeah, so why aren't you calling in 24 hours? Like, don't wait for a week until your special calling
Yeah.
time and then call people if they're worried. And so I know some people don't like this. In New York,
Yeah.
you're allowed to get your results electronically the minute that they're ready, even before the doctor has time to talk to you. Some people don't like it because then patients are calling, what's this, what's that? It's extra work. But I think it's great to be able to have that ownership of your results because those delays mean a lot
Yeah.
to a
Yeah.
patient, and you don't always think about it as the provider,
Hmm.
what that means.
So I want to go back to the system a bit. You describe it how they make millions, and then you gave a story about this, how this doctor was beaten, and
Mhm.
you listen to them. They did not care about the doctor. So how do you navigate and manage power, whether you are on in advocating for others in healthcare system?
So I do try to think about that when I'm doing prescriptions and talking about conversations about prescriptions because sometimes people will say like give me this antibiotic and you can tell they just think why are you just refusing to give it to me? You have the power and I know that my child needs this. And sometimes I have been convinced, like if you're waiting for a result and we don't know, but the parent is convinced, we'll talk about, okay, are you okay with the fact that maybe we've done unnecessary antibiotics and we might have to stop them if the result comes back negative? Because I don't want to abuse that.
Hmm.
At the same time, I have the education and I have the training, so I should be deciding who gets the medication. But when it comes to like over the counter things, over the counter cough medicine, for instance, you're not supposed to have it under like 4 or 6 years old. But let's say you're a 10-year-old. I don't think you need cough medicine. I don't think that that's going to really benefit you
Hmm.
because you're just fake suppressing the cough. If you have a cold,
Yeah.
the cough just has to go on its own. But if someone wants something that's over the counter, I should be writing that prescription because if I'm not giving it to you and it's over the counter, even if I might not have said this is a good idea, what I'm really doing is I'm making you pay for it because it's over the counter and if I wrote a prescription, maybe your insurance would cover it. But because I've
Yeah.
decided you don't need it, then you have to go pay for it. So I
Hmm.
feel very strongly about that. Also, referrals sometimes people want to see a specialist, but they might not really need to. But then I try to think, if someone's really, really rich, they can see a specialist and they can pay out of pocket and they don't need a referral from me. So am I punishing this person for not having that kind of income and that kind of power? So I do
Hmm.
try, if someone wants a referral, as long as it makes sense where I could say, okay, this is what the parent is thinking, and it isn't completely absurd. I do try
Yeah.
to provide it because I don't want to abuse that. And I do think that everybody has the potential to abuse power, everyone.
Yeah.
So
I think
I do try to check it. Mhm.
that's it. Yeah, those are good questions to ask before you decide or you give instructions. I think those are good guidelines that you have. So I want to ask you this next question. I think this is one of our next biggest question is what is your personal brand symbol and how do you use it every day in your life?
So you and I, again, we had a conversation about this because I was like, what is a personal brand symbol? I don't think I have one. And then you
Yeah.
started to describe it, and I immediately thought of the image that I think of when I think of myself and
Yeah.
or my brand. And it's an orca or a killer whale.
Mm-hmm.
Because this animal is extremely deep, no pun intended with the ocean, but this animal is has a bigger brain than humans do, and memory and language and all of that. And there is this story, a true story of an orca whose child died, and this orca carried the orca craft, the dead orca craft, for 17 days, just carried it on its body, which I don't
Mm-hmm.
know how you can swim carrying a dead body, but
Mm-hmm.
this orca managed to do that. And I think I love that message because it's like, this grief that I'm experiencing matters, and it's okay to have this feeling, and that's something that
Mm-hmm.
I'm always trying to share with my patients, with my colleagues, with my friends. If you're having a feeling, how you act on it, you want to make sure that you don't cause harm, but it's
Mm-hmm.
okay to have a feeling, and it's okay to be seen, and it's okay to cry, it's okay to be upset. And I try to make people feel safe to have those experiences.
Yeah.
So that's what I tend to think of. And also they are protective, I think. And so
Mm-hmm.
they move around in packs, and that's how I feel about community. Making
Yeah.
sure that people feel supported, making sure that it's not just your one parent. Like I talked about, you should have a community of parents who are looking out for you as a child. And just as a
Yeah.
human being, hopefully you have a chosen family or a biological family, but you should have people who are looking out for you. Um,
Yeah.
who would notice if you were gone, and take care of you if you couldn't take care of yourself. So I think that's my brand symbol, and I think that's how I use it every day. I use it mentally. I don't
Yeah.
have any image of it, but
Yeah. I think I saw, yeah, to your comment about how they move as a community. I think, you know, I also checked and I saw that it's a family of dolphins. Dolphins are generally nice animals or friendly animals. People swim with dolphins. And
Mhm.
for you, for your personal brand symbol, they hunt in packs. I think I saw that they hunt in packs of 40, like 40 of them, and they can even go after a big whale.
Mhm.
So that was something interesting. Another thing that was interesting is that the female killer whales can live up to 100 years. And for male, they can live up to 64 years. So just a fun fun fact there about a killer whale. How did you develop this passion for this personal brand symbol, or when did it register in your mind that this I would like to relate to this animal?
It was actually a documentary that I watched called Blackfish, talking about how this killer whale who was being held in SeaWorld, I
Mm-hmm.
think Orlando, ended up killing its trainer by
Mm-hmm.
dragging her under the water. And
Uh,
the documentary was examining how
mm-hmm.
this animal, who typically doesn't attack humans, would
Mm-hmm.
end up attacking a human. So going through its whole history, being kidnapped from its mother in Iceland decades before, being moved to different facilities, being kept in these, technically tiny pools,
Mm-hmm.
compared to an ocean. This is like being in a bathtub. And how would that make you feel, as a
Mm-hmm.
very, very intelligent animal with a bigger brain than a human, one of the most advanced animals that exists?
Mm-hmm.
How would this make you feel? And how would you maybe snap? And I do,
Yeah.
I do feel like, that makes sense. When people do anything, I try to think about, why does this make sense? Some people are just doing crazy things, but a lot of people have some kind of roots for what they're doing. So
Mm-hmm.
I definitely sympathized with this animal and learned a lot through this documentary about how this animal relates. Um, And then I think, I just happened to see because it made the news about that killer whale who was carrying its dead calf. And I thought that was amazing because
Mm-hmm.
even in probably in most societies, when people miscarry or they lose a child, there's this sense of, or I need to get on with it. I need to get back to my life. And,
Yeah.
that's such a profound loss. And when anybody is grieving anything, you should be able to fully display that. And, I don't know if you know this about Ghana, but we are big funeral people and big grief people. And we believe
Yeah.
that you need to cry it out and you need to mourn and you need to make a big deal of this death. And I
Yeah.
think that it's an important part of why we have a relatively healthy society emotionally, I would think.
Mm-hmm.
Um, because I do think that we pay tribute to our grief, and I think yeah, so that's another reason why I related to that animal a bit.
Yeah, I think in Ghana, yeah, like funeral is very big. Is I think even in Kenya, it's the most expensive celebration. People don't have money,
Mhm.
but when somebody dies, it costs a lot of money because there's a lot of celebrations happening, a celebration of life.
Yeah.
Is there a specific thing that drove you to associating maybe part of your life to the killer whale, or maybe your professional experience, apart from like you mentioned the experience in Ghana, but is there anything specific that said, because this is what I always do, this is why I relate to the killer whale?
Yeah, I don't know if it's just like a protective nature that I have. I'm trying to think if
Yeah.
there's anything specific.
Yeah, one
Um,
thing I noticed when you were telling the story is you started by saying you saw this killer whale dragging the person that was taking care of it, and I don't know if the person died. But and then he went on to tell a story about how they took this killer whale and they put it into a smaller
mhm,
uh, area, and you can relate to why it was doing this to people. So I felt you had compassion to the killer whale, and
mhm.
you say that they took the killer whale from the natural habitat into something artificial. So I was trying to connect the dots there on that.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. I mean, I guess I can relate to like feeling culturally displaced.
Yeah.
And also I'm a huge history enthusiast, so I
Yeah.
like to learn about people's stories and I like to learn about world history. I'm
Mhm.
not as interested in fictional stories just because I feel like nonfiction is just so exciting that these things really happened. And so I do like to study the things that have happened to people, how wars start, things like that. So yeah, I think I've developed some of that understanding, not necessarily even just from my own experience. And I have been displaced here and there, felt, uncomfortable in situations. But just learning about other people. So like other people who've had to hide for months in small spaces or
Hmm.
been kidnapped and kept in a small basement. I've read so many stories like that. So I think I've developed so much empathy just from reading about people's experiences. And I've
Yeah.
even recommended stories to my patients because I had a patient a long time ago who was extremely suicidal and just going through a lot. And it's amazing because I actually just had dinner with them the other day. They reached out to me because I did give them my number when I was leaving this job because I said I need to make sure I'm still there for you. So they're much older now. They're doing really well. But they were having a really hard time. And I remember saying, you've gone through so much, and I can't tell you that it's going to be okay because I haven't gone through exactly what you've gone through, but I can give you books to read. And so I just used to give book assignments, read this book, read about this person that experienced genocide, read about this person that went through this, and then try to see if there's anything that inspires you to want to survive,
Hmm.
based on how this person survived. Because, it's easy to say don't kill yourself, but, if someone really is having such a hard time and you're not in that exact situation, how can you say that
Yeah.
to someone? Because you don't know how
Yeah.
bad they feel. So I do try to cultivate empathy, no matter whether I've experienced something similar or not, just to try to understand.
Yeah. I think that's another area. I think we talked about turning compassion into justice and expertise into purpose. So I think you're doing a good job in that. Um, I wanted to ask you, what's the legacy you hope to leave, not just professionally, but personally?
The legacy I want to leave is probably just the things that I've talked about, being
Hmm.
compassionate in interactions
Yeah.
and also not being judgmental. And not to say that I'm not judgmental, because I am sometimes. All of
Yeah.
the things that I speak about, I fail at them regularly. But I think we do lose something when we judge someone because there is an opportunity to understand. Um, but there are people who do just abuse their power, and I think that
Yeah.
that needs to be exposed, and people who are vulnerable do need to be protected.
Hmm.
But yeah, I
Yeah.
think I think my biggest legacy that I hope to leave is the common sense parts and saying things like they are, because I think we spend a lot of time on meetings and bureaucracy and discussions, and sometimes we just don't get to the meat of an issue,
Yeah.
and we don't say things just exactly how they are because we're talking about people as groups and we're not talking about them as individuals. And
Yeah.
so I think, yeah, that's probably the legacy that I want to leave. And also just I think personal relationships are the most important things that you can have. There's nothing in your career that will ever make up for the love that you have for a family, for friends, and all of that. And so that's not something that I take lightly. I really try to invest in my personal relationships.
Yeah. Yesterday I interviewed Trey and he wrote a book about that titled Love is Bananas. And
That's great.
he was trying to find the meaning of love, and he asked people three questions. What's your definition of love? And all I forgot the other two. But
Mm,
he mentioned that love is the absence of judgment. So I
mm.
think to what you're mentioning, like if you want your legacy, you want to live, you want to live a life that is free of judgment. I think that's what you mentioned there. I think that's a good thing to live by.
Yeah, I
If
think
you,
free of stereotypical judgment. Like I don't want to judge certain things, but
yeah, yeah,
some things must be judged.
yeah. If you could change one thing about the healthcare system's approach to justice and equity, what would that be?
That's a really good question. I think that we need to monetize experiences. And so I don't think that that's going to actually economically bankrupt anyone. But I think patient satisfaction needs to be attached to money in some way. And I think that healthcare provider, including registered nurses, including patient transporters, I think their satisfaction needs to be monetized in some way. I don't think it's sustainable to have millions and millions of dollars being made while all parties are so unsatisfied.
Yeah, I agree. So you're just saying we need to monetize our experiences? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, so like the patient experience, the healthcare provider experience is not really tied to money in any way. It just exists in a vacuum, and how you are paid and how your employer is paid, is the same, regardless of if you're being exploited and having a terrible time and all of that.
Yeah. What's one question we don't ask our kids enough? As based on your profession, do you think there's a question that we should be asking our kids more than
I
we are
think,
doing?
yeah, I think unfortunately, I would say, has anything traumatic happened to you? Or have
Mm.
you witnessed anything traumatic? Because I do ask every teenager this when we are talking about mental health and things like that. And many have experienced very difficult things and their parents are not aware of it. And I think there's a sense of shame where if you are not asked, you might not say it.
Yeah, so finding a way to probe if something is wrong, and with that, we can reveal something that keeps people sad or disconnected for a long time. I think that's a powerful question we don't ask. I
Yeah.
agree.
And also, just if you want to hurt yourself, if you want to kill yourself, I think people are afraid of that concept because
Mm,
it might mean, was I a bad parent? Or also, what am I going to do? So maybe I'll just pretend that this is not happening.
yeah,
But those are questions that need to be asked. And just the other day, I asked someone, that's not what she was really in for, but it kind of went in that direction. And I did ask if she had hurt herself. And she told me in front of her parents, and her parent hadn't known. Um, she hadn't known to ask. And she's going to be fine. She's trying to experience her pain in a way that she can actually visualize. And so she's right now choosing to cut herself. And I'm saying, that's okay. But later we're going to figure out how to value yourself the way you would a stranger, because you wouldn't go cut a stranger. So you wouldn't want
yeah,
to do that to yourself. You want to treat yourself at least as well as you would someone else. That just makes sense. So, eventually, we'll work on that. But I think those are important things to ask as well, because people feel so afraid and embarrassed about having those thoughts, about having those feelings. They might not just say them out.
yeah. You found ways to probe the questions to overcome the disconnection and to connect with more people in a compassionate way. And some questions are tough. That's why you say your personal brand is courageous compassion. Courageous compassion, right?
Which
Yeah,
this seems to also be kind of your thing, because you are definitely great at asking questions, and I'm learning a lot from your
yeah.
interviews with people, and I think it's really great what you're doing.
I asked those two questions. Yeah, those people don't think about those two questions. People think about tell me about yourself, and then they give a general answer. So the questions I ask provides a deeper connection in how people can know more about themselves and the people around them. So I want to ask you rapid fire questions. Are you ready?
Yes,
Rapid fire questions. Biggest myth about leadership.
you don't have to be likable.
So you're basically saying you need to be likable.
Yes.
Powerful one. One book every business leader should read.
I think one book every person should read is Just Mercy by Brian Stevenson.
Is it also a movie? I think.
Yes, the movie is based on the book.
All right, I think I've seen that.
Mhm.
Uh, Morning routine or a night owl?
Morning routine, and I will argue that this is the way to go. Um, Waking up early helps you invest in yourself beyond your job. Otherwise, all you get is what's left of your energy after you've gone to work.
So there is something that you are doing that I think you're implying to. Can you tell us what that is?
So yeah, I work on writing in the mornings before I go to work, which you've talked about.
Yeah,
So I'm working on writing about, what you've talked about, like how to know when you really need to take your child to the pediatrician, and also how to relate to people as a new pediatrician, and also, a novel that I will hopefully publish at some point.
great. All right, next one. One thing people always get wrong about you.
I think sometimes when I meet people, they might think that I'm very shy, and I don't think that's necessarily the case.
Yeah, you're proving them wrong. If you weren't in this industry, I think you're in the healthcare profession now. What will you be doing if it wasn't for this industry?
I mean, if money were not a factor, or if money is a factor,
Anything.
I would be a DJ. I think music is one of my favorite things. I love people enjoying music. I love putting music together. So
Hmm.
that's what I would do.
Yeah, I think you should pursue it. Passion. You can do it on the side.
Yes. Yeah, I did it a little bit. Nellie's wedding after party, one of our high school friends. I did DJ for a while.
Oh, okay, Natalie. Yeah, she's
Mhm.
doing well. I think I need to interview her soon. Since you said you want to be a DJ, and I did not plan this, but this next question you should be able to answer it.
Yes.
If leadership had a soundtrack, what would your theme song be? If leadership had a soundtrack, what would your theme song be?
Let me say Condolence by Benjamin Clementine, I think. I just heard this song about a week ago. Somebody suggested it to me. And it's great because it's talking about how, I think I've been here before in this world and I've
Hmm.
already won. And the music sounds very inspirational. And I think it's definitely a motivator because, it can make you feel like, no matter what I'm doing for the seeming first time, I can still
Hmm.
succeed.
I'm going to look into that and see it. See what's that about. Next question, rapid fire question. What's next for you? Any big adventures or projects in the horizon?
Just the writing things, and then I'll speak to you offline about anything else.
Okay. All right, sounds good. I know you are writing. I've never met somebody that writes 4 books at one time. So I'm looking forward for the outcome.
I will see how it goes, but I try to just do some a day and
Yeah.
go from there.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think I know one guy, the guy I interviewed yesterday, Trey. I think I saw somewhere he's writing something for 3 minutes a day. I think that's what
Nice.
he said. 3 minutes a day, just to make sure that the book is going. This next question, I think you are from Nigeria. You are also Nigerian and also partly Ghanaian, correct?
Hmm.
So you are the right person to break this tie. Ghanaian jollof rice or Nigerian rice?
Senegalese,
Senegalese.
yes.
So none of the above. Senegalese jollof rice is better.
Jollof rice is originally from Senegal, so I don't think that we should be participating in that debate at all. I've never understood it, and I never
Hmm.
participate in it. Um, or in any of the Ghana Nigeria beef because I don't see why there's beef at all. But Senegalese jollof is delicious. It's amazing, and I
And
enjoy Nigerian and Ghanaian as well.
yeah, so now your Ghanaian friends will ask you some questions about your decision.
Yeah, and I faced this many times, and my passport is safe and secure, but nobody can take it from me.
Yeah. So those were the rapid fire questions. What's one piece of advice you want to tell the viewers?
Um, Honestly, it's not going to be necessarily career related because I feel like people know what they're doing or will figure it out. But just, in life, if you're going through something that seems like it's impossible, let yourself go through it and just try to breathe. Generally, situations can be figured out later, and generally, life changes and things get better or worse, but, eventually something changes. And so that's what
Yeah,
I would do.
you're basically telling them about empowerment. Empowerment, they can control their own life and take the right action.
Yeah, but also if you're going through a really hard time, it's okay to just let it get you for a little bit.
Hmm.
Because I think sometimes in these conversations, people feel like, oh my God, what am I doing? I need to be doing this, this, this. I need to achieve this, this, this.
Hmm.
She's working on four
Yeah.
books. What about mine? And sometimes your achievements is you got out of bed and you had something to eat and you were nice to someone and you try to do something tomorrow. Like I think people, do the best that they can and that's enough. And then if you can do something more, then
Hmm.
you figure that out as well.
Yeah. And what message do you have for your high school classmates?
I am shocked if any of you guys actually watched this, but um honestly, all of you guys have shaped me. We had a great time. I was laughing about this with somebody today, just explaining how our humor was at school and how we used to banter and all of that. And yeah, I think we've all helped shape each other. It was such a small community and we had a lot of fun. And so, if you're ever in New York, definitely hit me up.
Yeah. How can they get in contact with you and where can they find you?
Let me see. Yeah, my LinkedIn is there and
Hmm.
I'm just under my full name. So that's a good place to start because I do check all my messages and all of that. And then some of you guys have number and email and all of that too.
Yeah. Tayo, thank you very much. It's been fun interviewing you, and I know your voice is powerful and your leadership in healthcare and what you shared about parenting as being a parent as being the most influential leader. And with that, you're mentioning that they can direct their kids' lives and shape it to a brighter future. And so there's a lot of responsibilities for parents there. So if you're a parent, you don't want to miss this. And Tayo has a lot of expertise in healthcare from serving in a bus that was retrofitted just for healthcare system and helping kids make the right decision. She has a voice that can change people's life. So it was nice interviewing you, Tayo.
Thank you, Felix. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. I'm looking forward to your books. And also, I'm looking forward to seeing I think you said that your mother has two books. So I'm going to look into them
Yes.
and I
Yes.
will see if I should read them.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks. I think it's been nice.